So I hope you all had a moment to, send out a tweet or shoot a Facebook message out, a Facebook post, hashtag RFC 2015. So what I kind of described leads us right into the next speaker. The topics and ideas that we discuss at this conference go beyond the boundaries of Nebraska and the Great Plains, demonstrating that rural issues are of national and global importance. Reminding us of this, our next speaker is from the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. Joining us on video, he's connecting with us all the way from Cornell University in New York with his talk entitled Revitalizing Rural America, Mobilizing Towards Development. Help us welcome Hung Vo.
Hello everyone, my name is Hung Vo. I'm joining you at a distance from my dorm room at Cornell University. I apologize for not being able to make it, but I hope to contribute at least to this overall conversation at the Rural Futures Conference. Comprehensive planning in rural areas is essentially non-existent due to the lack of resources and human capital. Many development projects in rural towns are done in a compartmentalized and a la carte basis, and this process is not conducive to achieving the goals of rural futures, which I suspect to at least include the retention and attraction of people. In order to reconcile deficiencies in rural planning efforts, I propose that there be a nationwide effort to create a new agenda for rural regions, one that outlines priorities, goals, and strategies. America needs a rural makeover. Current policies and programs focus on institutional outcomes but lack cultural and social goals. Being someone who has been heavily involved in many UN processes, I think that there are lessons that can be learned from international frameworks, particularly from the UN Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2000, all 193 UN member states voted on the Millennium Declaration that eventually resulted in the creation of the UN Millennium Development Goals, a series of 8 goals, 21 targets, and 48 indicators with the primary purpose of eradicating extreme poverty and hunger worldwide. These goals expired in 2015 and will be replaced by a new global framework for development called the Sustainable Development Goals. What the international community has learned over these past 15 years is that these goals have worked and that they were able to mobilize actors around the world to work towards a common purpose. Meanwhile, these goals were able to help the global community overcome the foreign aid deficit that had started earlier in the 90s. It is hoped that the Sustainable Development Goals will be able to help continue to experience success these upcoming 15 years. In many ways, rural America can learn from these global goals and follow suit. America needs to create a national vision for a rural future that will map the current rural landscape, identify key rural towns to direct growth and decentralize urbanization, outline priorities and goals, develop metrics to measure impact, identify potential markets for investments and innovation, and create cross-sectional partnerships. And this is not an exhaustive list either. I believe that creating a participatory mechanism enabling important stakeholders in rural areas to become engaged in the rural planning process will result in the articulation of a rural framework for development that will be both innovative and sustainable, and one that will be able to accomplish the goals that rural America sets out for itself. There are a lot of options and dialogue surrounding the rural futures, but there hasn't been a holistic effort to bring these voices together to achieve a common purpose. Many people are frightened by UN frameworks, but what they fail to understand is that international declarations are non-binding in nature. Simultaneously, creating a national agenda for rural development in the United States will simply act as a roadmap and tool for progress, and at the same time mobilize important stakeholders to achieve common goals by bringing additional fund sources and opportunities for rural America. Thank you.
What a testament to the capacity and knowledge and leadership of a student such as Hung. He really alluded to that rural development issues and the rural landscape matters to countries and from around the globe. Our next Envision Rural speaker is connecting with us from the other side of the world. Though our countries may be in different hemispheres, there are many similarities between rural Australia and rural parts of the United States. From the University of Adelaide, Australia, please help me welcome Randy Stringer.
Good day, everyone. My name is Randy Stringer, and I work at the University of Adelaide Global Food Study Program in Adelaide, South Australia. And what I'd like to do today is share with you our experience in addressing some issues that are common across the world with urban sprawl and residential houses moving into agricultural land. So I'd like to share with you what we did and what we're doing right now about that. Now, my story begins about 4 years ago when the state government was pushing some new housing development into some prime agricultural land, some beautiful agricultural land aesthetically, but also great soil for growing crops. Here around Adelaide, we have wine grapes and cherries and figs. There's beef and there's dairy, there's sheep, there's horticulture products, there's almonds. And these producers in these areas approached me and said, look, how do we compete against these houses? Are we undervaluing our agricultural landscape? Is there more value to this than just the crops we grow? So what we did was sit down and work with them to look across the planet to see the different types of farm protection legislation and regulations that were trying to stop that sprawl. And what we learned was that you could have the best agriculture protection practices in the world. You could have right to farm, you could have good zoning, tradable development rights, but no matter what you did to protect farmland, didn't mean we're going to have profitable farmers. So what we decided to do was look again at what other experiences have been, and we learned a lot from Europe in terms of branding landscapes. Now, this isn't done too much in North America, certainly not done in Australia either, but what the Italian, Spanish, and French do is often set up landscapes with special names so that they can promote the history of those landscapes, tourism in those landscapes, connect tourism and connect people that come through to the restaurants, to that local food that comes from that area. So we decided we should pursue this with the local community, and what we ended up doing was looking at all the different experiences. We found in our case that the very top level of these agrarian parks or agrarian landscapes branding experiences were UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Out of 1,000 World Heritage Sites around the world, about 15 or 16 are agricultural landscapes. And there's 0 in the US, and there's 0 in Australia. Canada has one, Cuba has one, Mexico has one. Most of them are in Europe. So we thought, well, let's look across this experience of branding landscape. And in our case, we were lucky because we meet one of the criteria, and we're now trying to get World Heritage standing for the landscape surrounding Adelaide. But there's lots of ways you can go about this. And first, let me talk about why you should go about it. We think you should go about it because if you have an agrarian landscape that you can brand and promote, it provides a marketing platform for your tourism, for your products, for your restaurants, for your farmers market. It provides an investment platform both for public and private, so you can get public investment to support with signage and more information about the history of the area, how this area was shaped and changed in the landscape affected by markets and regulations. It's a pro-growth strategy. You can attract more high-yielding tourists. Now, to move this idea to other areas, North America and other places, we would suggest the lessons from our lessons is you really have to start with the producers first to get them on board so they recognize this is not new regulation. That's very important. Then you need to bring in your restaurants and your retailers and all those different actors along the chain so that they can get behind it and then start attracting some promotion from those groups, bring in local government first, then move to state government and work your way through that process. So we really think this could be an opportunity that we're missing in North America and Australia. And I certainly hope that you'll visit our webpage and learn what we're doing. And I look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you so much for your time.
Another round of applause for Randy for joining us video streaming. So today we've talked about how to innovate, improve, and uplift our communities to affect the world in a positive way. Okay, well now who starts the change? And how do leaders make decisions that can ensure that the community is being taken to the next level in the right way? Our answers come in the form of Jeff Yost from the Nebraska Community Foundation, who's presenting on the role of discretion in leadership development. Please help me give a warm welcome to Jeff Yost.
Good afternoon. I was joking with these guys that I can't really clear my throat in 5 minutes, so this is going to be hard. So many of the things that are on the front end of my presentation have been covered so well in the last day and a half that I'm just going to buzz right through them. The first piece is I'm just absolutely convinced that we have to have flexibility as it relates to leadership development. So that's the premise here. The theory of change we have at the Nebraska Community Foundation is the only people that can build a community are the people that live and work there, and the rest of us can help. But that's all we can do is help. And in Nebraska, we have all this abundance, and we really need to think about it in those sorts of terms. One of the ways of doing that is through this massive transfer of wealth that we have going from one generation to the next. We think it's some $600 billion here in Nebraska in the next 50 years. And one of the frames we have to do then is to say, okay, if there's this huge amount of abundance, why on earth have we continued to hemorrhage kids over time? So one of the frames we've put to it is how do you help create magnetic communities, communities that are drawing people toward them? So we've put together these pieces, and I agree that this is not formulaic work. However, there are pieces that build upon one another here: vision, distributed leadership, discretionary capital, and ultimately citizen engagement, people that are giving their time, talent, and treasure to the future of their place. For this goal, we have to be in the people attraction business. In Nebraska, we have thousands of jobs that are going wanting for a lack of people. And we really need to continue to think about this. Economic development just isn't about job creation. It's really about building communities where people say, I want to live and work, this is where I want to raise my kids. So you connect that to leadership development. And personally, I'm convinced that leaders aren't born, they're made. And we become better leaders by practicing. And there's lots of things we need to practice doing. Here's some of those. But ultimately, the thing we need to do is have the opportunity to make choices that matter, learn from those choices, and then do better the next time. This is a little compare and contrast chart, and this could really get me off into the weeds. So this isn't a values proposition at all. It just means that today, things are very different than they were 50 years ago. When my dad was on the local board of education in my little hometown of Red Cloud in the 1960s, those board members had an enormous amount of discretion. They also did it with all their own resources. So in 2015, you have a fair amount of state and federal aid for all these different services, but now we have standards and mandates and a whole different set of rules. The point being, it's a different experience today to be a locally elected official than it was 50 years ago. So one of the tools that we've tried to bring to the fore in helping people to have that opportunity to practice is a community-focused unrestricted endowment. Very simply, an endowment is a permanent pot of money where you're just spending an annual payout, creates a perpetual income stream, and how do you use that as a real margin of excellence? How would you use the $45,000 created annually off a $1 million endowment to really focus on the future, focus on development, not relief, use it as a margin of excellence, create a space for people to dream about the future, and obviously help people make the case themselves to their friends and neighbors about investing in the future of their place. Through the Nebraska Community Foundation, we're doing this in lots of places in lots of ways. We now work in about 250 communities around the state. That's one estimate, that's one illustration of the growth we've seen through the Nebraska Community Foundation over the last 10 years. It's grown a lot. And the question really comes down to this, thank you. If we're trying to do people attraction, how are we doing that? We can do it through workforce development, we can enhance curriculum, we can do all sorts of things with early childhood education or business development. The question becomes, what are the choices we want to spend our money on to try to attract people? The other thing about this is, what are the skills, what are the behaviors that we really want leaders to have and engender to create that space where people say, that's the community that I want to be a part of. So as you can see, this list of skills and behaviors associated with leadership development are very much in a power with as opposed to power over frame, where if we're doing this in partnership, we're doing this within the context of trust and relationship, we can really help one another get to where we want to go. The one I want to lift up off this list is the final bullet, which is, I think, the other thing all of us have to do as leaders is really challenge those assumptions about locally available capacity. So to sum this up, we're really optimistic that unrestricted endowments are another tool in the community development toolkit that can help us build not only flexible money, but an opportunity to really practice leadership, and practice leadership in, ways that are really participatory, distributed, and ultimately create the hometowns that we want to be a part of. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to the Nebraska Community Foundation and all the work that organization does to develop local leaders. And our next speaker is certainly a difference maker and an engaged leader in her community of Broken Bow and in the state of Nebraska. With her talk entitled Eat Your Wheaties, They Are Going to Need a Champion, help me welcome Melissa Garcia.
My daughter Grace loves to sing. She sings in the car, she sings while she plays, she serenades me from the stalls of public bathrooms. That kid is always singing. When she was 3, she would ask anyone who was listening if they wanted to hear her favorite song. And she would throw her arms open and belt out the words, "Grace is amazing." It was her version of the song Amazing Grace. And while to this mom it still had a pretty sweet sound, she might have missed that target just a little bit. But it's moments like those that remind me of just how profoundly a global message can impact our individual thinking. And as we envision a vibrant rural future, we need to be very intentional in our role in influencing others, especially when we're seeking change. To do this, we need to seek out those people who are willing to gather us together and drive us to believe in better. Those people are grassroots champions, or hope leaders. And they're special because they're not in it for the job title, and they're not in it because they have a personal agenda. They simply want all of us to come together in search of a common vision. It's about being a part of something bigger than yourself. It's purpose-focused, and it's about perseverance. It has to be, because the magic starts when we have frustrated people. We have to be frustrated. We have to get to that point where the idea of inaction or status quo is no longer good enough. We have to allow people a chance to be frustrated, because frustration is often a sign of faithfulness. And correctly handled, it's this level of unrest that allows us to enter into that dynamic, healthy conflict that ultimately leads us to our greatest solutions. So, if you find yourself in that role of champion, I'd like to have you consider a few things. First, listen to what's not being said. Very rarely is it the words that are spoken that are truly important. It's the why someone says it, the what they hope to accomplish by engaging you in that conversation. That is a key component to really understand and drilling down to the root of why we need to seek change in the first place. Second, we have to come to that realization that one person does not know the answer to everything. And so we have to be courageous enough to ask for help, and even more, we have to be willing to implement advice. And I think this is really important because we get to this place where when we're asking for help, we feel like as a champion, we have to be in that limelight the whole time, but that's not true. Sure, a champion will kick off a message, but even more often, they're gonna hand off the ball so someone else can take it into the end zone. It's that work in the background, that work facilitating the message so that the ownership is shared, so that when the champion isn't there, the movement is still going forward. Because that's when a movement becomes successful. There is no better way to ensure that our movements today become legacy scale work than sharing that ownership and passion. Third, celebrate, but don't stop. There is a real hazard to stopping to admire how far we've come and starting to feel as though we've done enough. When we start to reach our goals and we get closer to that vision, we have to take that hope that we created early on and we have to grow it, remembering that a vision is a moving target. And if we reach it, it's become our mission, that thing that we do every day. This gives us permission to continue to dream of better, and that's amazing. But just like any successful team, the champion is going to need others with various strengths and resources to be at their table. And a champion is going to need something from them. They might not ask, but they're going to need it. A great champion will never take credit for the work. There's no reason to. They appreciate the value and the work and the dedication that you bring to the table. Take the credit. You deserve it. But also realize that this game of progress is never a straight shot to the top. There's going to be twists and turns, and when we get there, that champion is human, and they might need to be reminded that they have value too. Remind them. If we forget this issue, ours could become another story of not truly understanding what we have until it's gone. Next, a good champion is already going to ask, and they're going to know what you're passionate about. And when they need someone with that particular fire in their belly, they're going to come to you. Do the work. If they didn't need the help, they wouldn't have asked. Finally, bring more people to a place where they dare to hope to pursue the vision. New ideas and new energy that come from a continued grassroots efforts light the world on fire. And it's one thing for a champion to recruit new interest, and it is a whole nother level of awesome when someone else does. So be awesome, like my daughter Grace. She's 5 now, and she has moved on to the lyrical influences of Taylor Swift. But there is still evidence that she believes she's amazing. And the best part of that is that we all have the potential to be and do amazing things. We just have to commit to a vision and then decide what role we must play to move it forward. So eat your Wheaties, because our rural future depends on all of our willingness to set the world on fire. Thank you.
Another round of applause. Thank you so much, Melissa, for sharing that amazing message. So, as communities look for new ways to collaborate and grow, they're going to have to start thinking outside of the box. I should restart that sentence. As our communities look for ways to grow, we are going to start thinking outside of the box. Landscape design is something that's becoming increasingly important in bringing communities together and allowing them to grow in the healthiest way possible. Here to share how proactive landscape management can benefit rural communities, please welcome Professor Larkin Powell from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a wildlife biologist, and I think a lot about Nebraska's landscapes. Our landscapes are productive, and they're unique. And the things that happen on our landscapes are largely a result of a change in a market. If we think about the current landscapes of Nebraska, there are some troublesome trends if we're honest with ourselves. 75% of our land base is used to grow 3 commodities. They're important commodities, and we use the words feeding the world a lot. And when we do so, we give priority to the productive values of landscapes that you can monetize with cash, as opposed to the natural services that ecosystems provide that are typically harder to monetize. Our productive yet simple cropping systems have created landscapes that are less suitable for many wildlife species, including our state bird, the western meadowlark, and a popular game bird, the ring-necked pheasant. And nitrates have increased in our drinking water supply. Our neighboring state, Iowa, is home to Des Moines, who has sued to protect their drinking water. So these trends and others suggest that in the future, as production rises to feed a world, we're going to have to be more proactive in how we manage our landscapes in Nebraska. And certainly one of the problems is that most of Nebraska doesn't live in the landscape that you see here. They live in cities, but city dwellers are still interested in what happens on farms and ranches. Traditionally, the public has had 3 ways to purchase their way or buy their way back into decisions that are made on these rural spaces. First of all, we can regulate. That's a cheap, easy fix, but regulation, as we all know, is very difficult in agriculture, logistically and politically. We can use public funds to create incentive programs, but those come at great cost to taxpayers. We could also use public funds to potentially purchase unique landscapes in Nebraska to create something like a National Wildlife Refuge. We did this after the Dust Bowl, but doing this today would be probably politically disastrous. For an alternative, come with me to one of my favorite places on earth, Southern Africa to the country of Namibia. By the 1970s, wildlife had all but disappeared on the farms in Namibia because it was seen to compete with cattle for grass resources. Farmers could clear out the predators and all of the grazing wildlife on their lands and sell their land at auction wildlife free for a premium price. This system caused disastrous effects to the ecosystem. The innovation was that Namibians determined that they could give value to wildlife, and suddenly wildlife could be sold at the butchery, just like cattle. Farmers brought those animals back to the farm, and the neighbors often joined together to create economic zones where ecotourism flourished, and people now come from all over the world to pay to access wildlife in Namibia. Can we use markets in similarly interesting ways in the US to restore our landscapes? Carbon markets have potential to preserve grasslands, save soil and water, store carbon, and slow climate change. Markets for wetland easements provide an opportunity to link the nearby urban residents to pay for the habitat restoration that they're interested in to filter the nitrates from their drinking water that they're concerned about. And ecotourism markets provide an opportunity for those same urban residents to access both beautiful landscapes as well as wildlife. There are people that are afraid of using markets for conservation. But I ask you in that conversation to consider the landscape changes that you see on this 1 square mile in Clay County, Nebraska. Those changes were made because of market forces. And we know that people have joined together in Namibia and other places around the world to create markets that are useful to solve conservation problems. We need to be more proactive in how we use our landscapes in Nebraska. I hope we have a good conversation about that because we need our landscapes for tomorrow. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Larkin, for prompting us to think about how we can use our natural landscape and creating markets with our natural, beautiful landscape that we have in rural parts of our country. All of these speakers throughout Envision Rural, as well as previously today and yesterday, have really motivated me to think about what I will do, what I will make moving forward to help benefit and impact rural people and places. Our next speaker is a maker. He's also an engineer, an innovator, and a doer. With his talk entitled Maker Spaces in Rural Communities, join me in welcoming Shane Ferreter from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Welcome. Very excited to be here. I represent something called Nebraska Innovation Studio, which is a makerspace we're creating here on Innovation Campus. You'll have the opportunity to tour this at 5:30 to 7 tonight. It's just across the building on the other side of the room. Let me explain a little bit about that. First of all, I'm a rural community guy. I grew up in a little town called Ravenna, Nebraska. My dad owned a hardware store. It was probably the building in town that, every 3 days the whole town cycled through or something like that. It was really a hub for that town. Our job was basically to sell nuts and bolts to farmers because something broke and it needed to be fixed. They're building a project, they need some material for that. I'm a real believer in rural communities. My new job is that I make robots. I put this up here because my making of robots was really born in that little community. I think Nebraska and rural communities are full of makers, and it's a latent ability that we are largely ignoring, and we need to do a better job of exploiting. I think Silicon Valley is going to always win at mobile apps and online banking, and New York will be the investment banking center for a long time, but Nebraskans make things. Rural communities make things, and that's where we can become world leaders very quickly. So let me tell you about this concept of makerspaces. Makerspaces are areas where people get together to make things, and that's really the end of it. A lot of ladies get together in the church basement to quilt. That's one version of a makerspace. The way I describe makerspaces are they're like a rec center. A lot of you probably belong to some kind of rec center because you don't have this kind of equipment at home and you want to become more fit. You don't have an exercise bike, you don't have a gymnasium, you don't have a swimming pool, so you pay a fee every month to get access to this. The same is true for making things. You may not have all the equipment you need to make things, but you can pay a small fee to have access to that through a makerspace. Lots of important things happen in makerspaces. First of all, you connect with other people who are interested in making and other people who have diverse interests in making. It's not just ladies who make quilts. They should connect with other people who make different things, artists or people who have new product ideas. People can learn new skills in makerspaces, skills that are important today. Our makerspace will have laser cutters and 3D printers and all kinds of computer-controlled equipment. Rural communities can support these things, and they can educate the people of the community in the use of these things. Makerspaces are frequently the home of great entrepreneurship. I can list off several things that were invented in makerspaces. Physical products, again, where rural communities can really make a contribution, and I think they can be the hub of entrepreneurship. I guess one example, I have a friend from my hometown who makes sheds that you put over the pump for your irrigation system. He just welds together a roof and a little structure and he makes sheds. He makes a few of those for some family and neighbors. But that could be a business with just a little bit more encouragement. And he needs a makerspace. And again, I say it fits Nebraska culture and it fits rural culture. I always point to vice grips in Nebraska. Center pivot irrigation, there's a long story of hardware-based companies and innovations that, vice grips were invented 85, 90 years ago, and they're still making a huge impact today. I used one in the last 24 hours. So when you bring people together like this, magic can happen. So let me get very specific. This is the makerspace you can tour next door, and we're designing this very specifically so it can become a hub to support other makerspaces. We're trying to make a very diverse group. We're trying to get a diversity of ideas into the space. We're trying to get a density, everybody in the same space. We're trying to design the architecture so people can make connections here. You can see the big common bench area and common work area in the middle, but you can also see a great diversity from art to metalworking and woodworking, electronics, and digital fabrication like 3D printers and laser cutters. Now, I started with a slide from Ravenna. I'll end it with a slide from Ravenna. This is the Carnegie Library in my hometown of Ravenna, Nebraska. Not very ADA compliant. They're just starting to have talks about building a new library. Very important. This is what they should do. But I'm trying to tell them they should not build just one building with books. This is a building with some books in it. Part of it should be set aside as a makerspace. It should have 3D printers and laser cutters. It should have community involvement. You should have meetings there as people come together and build things. This fits the culture of those people that came in and out of that hardware store, and this is where they can make a big impact. I want to litter the sky with, or darken the sky with makerspaces across Nebraska. Ravenna can't do everything itself, but the makerspace here at the University of Nebraska, for example, could be a hub, and there could be several spokes across the state of Nebraska. One of the strikes against rural communities is they lack the density required. This is the theory about why cities exist, to create innovation. If you're next to everyone else and you're mixing with everyone else, you can lead to more innovation. We need to connect maker spaces together in different communities to make an artificial density of these ideas. I think they can make a very, very big impact, and I hope you'll all stop across the hallway and take a tour of what we're trying to accomplish here. And please come up and talk to me. I want to talk to people about maker spaces. I want to talk the city of Ravenna into building a new makerspace there and help those people become better at what they're already good at. So, thank you.